Hi, I'm Ruth Hamlin Douglas, one of the librarians at Thunder Bay Public Library, and we are happy to host local author readings. Today we are joined by Peter Fergus-Moore.
Hi, my name is Peter Fergus-Moore. I'm a writer mostly of nonfiction centered in the Northwest here for over 30 years. What I am about to share with you today is a fictionalized true story from the life of my late mother-in-law, Helen Fergus. Born in Finland, she was raised in Coppercliff, Ontario, Canada. Her father was a cobbler, the first such shoemaker in Coppercliff. But prior to that, he worked in the International Nickel Mine and Smelter Complex there. The story is written as for a children's book from Helen's point of view. I have not spared the anxiety with which the families of Coppercliff and so many other places grew up because of the dangerous nature of the work, the sense of which Helen conveyed to me in telling me this and other stories of her childhood. Hopefully, I have managed to convey in the story some of the music of the Finnish language, some of which she taught me with great patience. Any errors in the language are mine. So without further ado, the story of Kisu, the great orange cat. My name is Rauha, which means peace in the Finnish language. I lived at a time when there was very little peace anywhere. Far away in Europe, the First World War was in a great rage, drawing millions of people into it like a huge whirlpool, swallowing a helpless ship. Where I lived in Coppercliff, the war drew people into working long, long hours to dig the nickel out of the deep, rocky earth for the guns and ammunition of the armies. One of those workers was my father. Although he had been a skilled shoemaker in Finland before he came to Canada, Father worked in the dingy coal grinding shed near the smelter. The grimy coal dust, which powered the huge smelting furnaces, could catch fire very easily, even explode without warning. The men who toiled there were often exhausted from the long hours of work to supply the war in Europe. Sometimes Father would work 20 hours straight. There were many accidents in the mines and in the smelter. On every street of Coppercliff there lived people who had lost a loved one or who tried to look after a member of their family who had been badly injured in the dangerous work. We always worried about him, although none of us said very much of anything about it. Every time that Father came home dusty black from head to foot, we celebrated a little inside ourselves and worried all over again for the next time when he would depart from us. Even the love in our home couldn't keep out the fear, but at least we all bore a little of it. Sometimes Father would leave for work when I was home from school and my little brother Kullervo was not yet in bed. At those times, we would help Father as he made his preparations. Once dressed in his thick work clothing, he would accept his heavy boots from young Kullervo, who would proudly strain to lift them into waiting hands. And then Father would take his lunch pail from my hand. Kiitos, he would thank us. And then Father would kiss me above my nose, pat Kullervo on his head, and touch Mother's hand before he bent down to stroke Kisu, our orange cat, once or twice. When he left the house, making his way to the wooden sidewalk that led to the smelter gate, Kisu always leapt out the door to follow him. Father had tried to shoo the orange cat home any number of times. He told us that he didn't want that cat to get killed by the dogs on the street or the machinery where he worked. But Kisu was a stubborn animal. She would duck her head under the first opening she could find in the planks and scurry under the sidewalk until she came out near the smelter gate. And there, Kisu would wait patiently for Father to come along and then dive against his legs as he passed her. Bah! Father would chide her, but he always smiled. When it was time for Father to come home again, Kiso somehow always knew the right hour, even if Father had to work double shifts and longer. The orange cat would rise and stretch her body out very, very long. And then she would yawn a yawn that made her mouth open like a lion about to roar. She would then meow quietly to us until someone would open the door for her. And once out, she was off like a whiz-bang firework, disappearing under the sidewalk to emerge at the smelter gate just as before. Only this time, when Father exited from the smelter, the two of them would walk home together like old friends. Mother and Father never said anything about his work in front of the children, but Kullervo and I knew that Mother worried the most of us about Father being safe in the noisy, dark shed with the filmy coal everywhere. She washed Father's work clothes all the time, sometimes with my help, outside in good weather. When the clothes were wetted and scrubbed with the strong soap cut into shavings with Mother's kitchen knife, coal dust would run off them like oily black snakes onto the ground behind the house, leaving a slippery black ooze. Our hands went beet red under the greasy blackness with the hard work. When accidents happened at the mines or the smelter, Father and Mother would get very quiet, often become a little extra gentle with us. Mother or Father would take things to a neighbor's home if a family member there had been injured or killed. Once, I took over a small bag of potatoes from the root cellar to the Lapalainen's next door after Mr. Lapalainen broke his back deep underground. Everyone was frightened about what might happen, but no one said anything as the months and the years of the war came and went, until one night late in 1917. On that night, I was roused out of a dream by an eerie siren sound, like the mine disaster siren. Rubbing my eyes, I could make out the blue-white moonlight dotted by silver flecks of snow outside, as inside the yowling grew louder and louder. It was Kisu, almost beside herself, I could tell, but why? I stole quietly over to the stair landing to look down the stairway into our kitchen. Mother, at the foot of the stairs, held a lighted oil lamp, ready to mount the stairs while the orange cat dove at the doorway, scratching at the wood as though it were an enemy. "What's the matter, Kisu?" she asked. Kisu only meowed louder and more urgently, scratching even harder at the door. She jumped and yowled until Mother opened the door to the winter night. Out bolted the orange cat down the wooden sidewalk, out of sight. Mother leaned out the door as puzzled as I was. Father was not due home for hours yet. I crept down the stairs to Mother's side, hoping to see for myself. Then we saw the smoke, great plumes of it, pouring upward from the mine site. We could make out the din of people shouting, the clanging of bells, the grinding sounds of machinery and engines, all from Father's work area. As the smoke plume blotted out the moon, we dashed out of the house together. Mother called Father's name in a voice I'd never heard her use, high and shrill like the mine whistle. I was so frightened that my throat crumpled into a tight ball. We waited, not knowing what to do and trying not to fear the very worst. We waited for what seemed like hours, staring at the smoke and the terrifying scene until Emmy. Mother and I looked around. We caught sight of Father just then, making his way up the wooden sidewalk, with Kisu running around his legs. He walked slowly, stiffly, in the deep shadow of the smoke. We scurried in his direction. Just then the moon showed through the smoke clouds once more, revealing Father as he really was. We all stopped, as though frozen in our places. Mother's mouth dropped open. I screamed. Father started, seeing our surprise and horror. His clothes were all blackened and burnt. His face was a greasy black mask with only his eyes showing frightened white. Rags had been wrapped around his hands, while on his forehead a small trickle of blood seeped through the rag Father held in place. And all this time the orange cat was yowling, running around Father, bumping into his legs. Mother took Father and propelled him into our home. Slamming the door, Kisu shot into the house too. Inside, the noise and the smoke seemed to belong somewhere else, to another world. Mother pushed Father down into a chair to begin the work of cleaning his wounds, and still the cat made noise. Mother wheeled, facing me. "Vesey," she snapped. I hurried to get a pot of water on the stove to boil. The fire was getting low, so I busied myself poking it, trying not to stare at Father. The fire hissed and popped, sounding almost like grouchy Tetty Timey when one of us children disturbed her on a visit. I did not notice that I was crying until the tears started to speckle my wrists with big, wet drops. Rauha? I looked over to see Mother's face set in a solemn, almost pleading expression. "Kavi Miras," she almost smiled. I understood her apology for speaking to me so sharply. I was still too frightened to smile myself. Father looked terrible. He picked up Kisu to set her in his blackened lap, petting the cat briskly with one of his hands without looking at her. He favored his other hand in a way that made me not want to look too closely. "Ese ole mitan," he said suddenly. "It's nothing." Mother and I looked up, around. Father smiled just a little at Kullervo, who was out of his bed, standing before Father in the kitchen as we worked, staring without understanding at what he saw. "What's that smell?" Kullervo said sleepily. "Back to bed," Mother said. She nodded to me. Taking my brother's hand, I led him up the stairs, up and into our room. "Why is Father black?" he asked stubbornly, trying to stay awake. "He looks funny." "Nukutas," I quieted him. I had never known my little brother to listen to me and obey me before, but that night it took only a word from me, and he sank into his covers. Soon Kullervo breathed in that hissy, sleeping breath of his, but there was to be no sleep for me. My heart beat like the sledges the railroad men used on the rails as I thought about what I had seen in our kitchen. At last, I couldn't contain my desire to know what had happened to Father. I quietly got out of bed, tiptoed to the head of the stairs once again. Here I could clearly see Father, though Mother's back was to me. Both were so preoccupied at first that neither sensed my presence at the top of the stairs. Too, Mother made a fair bit of noise, what with making the coffee and tending Father's wounds. Against the fresh, homey coffee smell came other harsh smells of dirty grease, burnt wood, and cloth. I shuddered. Wordlessly, Mother tugged gently at the filthy cloths around Father's hands, revealing the worst of the wounds. Father winced, gasping several times during that work. I am sure that I felt as out of breath and in pain as he did. By this time, Kisu sat nearby, watching Father as though he might disappear any minute. Mother gazed quietly at Father, waiting for him to say his piece. "The coal grinding shed blew up," he said simply, staring at his hands. "One minute we were loading in more coal. The next minute there was this big crack in the air. so loud I couldn't hear a thing after that. He drank some more coffee, gingerly holding the warm mug by his wrists. Then fire and smoke, and we all threw away our tools and made to get out. I dove through the window of the shed and blacked out, I guess. He paused, looking at Kisu. The next thing I knew, I'm lying on my back in the snowdrift, with old Kisu here jumping up and down on my chest, yowling like the mine siren. She'd stop and lick my face sometimes. Felt like a piece of sandpaper. Kisu? Mother asked. Yo, Father said, acting just about like I was dead and she was trying to bring me back. Mother was quiet for a time. I couldn't see her face, but I could tell what she might have been thinking. I was thinking the same. Mother told Father then about Kisu's strange behavior from before. What a cat, Father said. He turned to look in the orange cat's direction. You woke me up, so I got out of there before anything worse happened. You might have saved my life, you old rascal, he said. You're a great orange cat. Involuntarily, I moved, causing the floorboards to creak loudly. Mother and Father both started in surprise. I stood up, moved to the top of the stairs where they could both see me clearly. Nukutas, Mother chided me. I shook my head. She's heard it all, Father said gently. But there's more to say. Join us, girl. I came down the stairs then to stand near my parents. I'll go back in a little while to see how Fred and Imo and the others are. I think we all got out, I'm not sure. Davide, Mother blurted. Se ole metan, Father reassured her. I won't put myself in any danger. Those fellows would do the same. Mother reluctantly gave in to him. She and I found things to do around the small kitchen that normally could wait until morning. It was we who could not wait until morning just then. We stopped work at one point, dropping our things, and hugged each other without a word for a long time. I think then, when I felt my mother's fear is the same as my own, that I began to grow up. The next morning, things were very much as before, except that Father would not be going into work that day because of his hands. We ate breakfast, all of us in silence, and cleaned the house in silence. Father gently set his coffee cup down on the table in a certain way he had. We knew that he had something that he wished to tell us, so Mother and I waited expectantly. I won't be working there much longer, he said, looking at each of us. I will do something else. Mother and I looked at each other, frightened and joyful all at once. But what did Father mean? Fortunately, his wounds were not serious. Father was even able to go back to work for a while, helping to rebuild the coal shed. When he was home, he and Mother busied themselves moving things around in their bedroom. I could see that they were clearing a space, as though we were getting something new to put in. Sometimes they spoke together softly, but they would not tell my brother or I anything. My curiosity grew. One day, when it was Father's shift time, he did not put on his heavy work clothes. Instead, he went to the clothes closet, returning with his box of shoemaker's tools, which he carefully placed in the cleared space in their bedroom. Both he and Mother, usually solemn, were smiling. Kisu seemed to understand something was happening, for she dived against Father's leg, making loud, happy purring sounds. Only Kullervo and I remained in the mystery. Finally, I asked, "Isn't it time to go to work, Father?" Rauha, he smiled. Today, I begin work in a new location. We children looked at each other, still puzzled. Here, these tools worked in Finland, and they will work here in Canada, he told us. I'm going back into the business of making shoes. He paused, looking solemn once more. "We will have less for a time," he said, "but we will not go hungry." True to Father's words, we did have less. They were not easy times for anyone, but we did not go hungry or lack clothing or food or shelter. And after a time, Father's shoemaking business made us enough money that he never had to think again of working in the coal shed with its dangers. And he took also to calling Kiso the great orange cat. And whenever Father left the house, he always invited the cat to come along. Often we watched them, Father no longer coming home blackened from head to foot, and the great orange cat walking together down the wooden sidewalk like two old friends. Dedicated to the memory of Eleni Rauha Helen Fergus, 1910 to 1995.